Operator Syndrome, episode 52. Last time we were talking to Steve about his transition story, getting out of the SEAL teams. And we're heading in that direction with me as well. So, in the last time we were going through my story, I was talking about my Mosul deployment in the summer of 2008, I believe. Um, I think where I'd want to pick up there is to talk about I'd mentioned how it was a stressful time. Um, we were doing multiple raids. The op tempo that was insane. We would do multiple missions a night. To do to have a night off was basically unheard of.
Mm.
It happened, but it was unheard of. Um, to do one mission basically never happened. The way we were set up to run back then was you'd hit a target, you would find something, some reason to some piece of intelligence to go somewhere else, talk to someone else, find something. That was the way it was. In some of the worst nights, worst or best, depending on your mood,
Yeah.
depending if this is what you'd signed up for. I think I said the number was we there was one night where we got into double digits. We rated 10 or slightly more separate places in one night, one period of darkness, not even 24 hour, a period of darkness. And um, it was it was good for making the deployment go by quickly. It was good for staying busy, right? I mean, you felt busy, but it tipped over to the point where it was really starting to bother me. Um, I don't recall it bothering many other people, but we're all in our own heads. So um, for me, I think where I saw that stress build up the most was in my sleep, in my sleep or lack thereof. Um, I was also working out a lot, I guess, to try to deal with that stress. Um, it wasn't necessarily combat related, right? It wasn't like, oh, I'm taking bullets and grenades every night. It wasn't that because 99.9% of the time it could even be a dry hole. There could be literally no one there. Or it could just be or it could be a house or a building or whatever, an objective where we met no resistance, right? We did our jobs right. We had, speed surprise, violence of action, and we overwhelmed the target, and it was fun.
Yeah.
But it was just it was just grinding how often we were doing it. And every time, it didn't matter if it was the first raid of the night or if it was the fifth raid of the night. The emotions that
Mhm.
built up every time
Yeah.
it was the exact same, at
Right.
least for
Right.
me. And one could say that if that didn't happen, that could potentially be what complacency is, right? Where you make the mistake. That was always the fear. It's that
Yeah.
this is the fourth raid of the night. Surely nothing will go wrong here, just like the
Yeah.
other three this evening. So let me let my guard down, and oops, the house exploded. Oops,
Yeah.
there's a guy with a gun in this room. Oops, my buddy's dead. So that fear, it was just, it's like it recycled multiple times a night. You know, setting up on the objective, hitting the objective, until you're safe, until it's cleared, and you're waiting and you're hoping to get the call to go back, go back, and then they're like, "Oh, follow on, get back in the
Mhm.
strikers, let's go to the next place." And so I saw that come out in my sleep, in my mood.
Mhm.
Um, I remember towards the tail end, we were playing a basketball game that got kind of rowdy. Like I was noticing that it was definitely bothering me. And it's funny enough, it was at the very end of that deployment. we had, before we redeployed back home, you always did this, the senior medic would always do this PowerPoint brief where they were talking about like reintegrating back home. It was always like the senior medic like in cahoots with like the chaplain.
Yeah.
Like they pile us into the jock, the joint operations center, like the one big room that had like an auditorium. We're
Yeah.
all sitting in there. You're a week or two from going back home, and they throw on this PowerPoint, and they're talking about, they're like, hey, when you get home, um, like what kind of stuff do they say? They say stuff like, hey, you miss your wife and your kids. Your kids are gonna run up to you,
Excuse
bless
me.
you. Your kids are gonna run up to you, give them a hug and all that, but don't forget to embrace your wife too, right?
Oh
They
yeah.
say stuff like that, like don't forget about her. She's been waiting too. Like they went into how to romantically reintegrate at
Oh
the
boy.
time. They were like, hey, don't be too eager, it's like slow,
Yeah.
quicker, like things like don't come in and like become Mr. At the time it was Mr. We were all guys back then, but don't become like Mr. Disciplinarian. Like you haven't been
Right.
there. Like might
Right.
your kids might get like might resent you for just showing up after being gone and then like start to discipline them. So it was like tips like that. But one of the things they covered was combat stress. And now I'm sitting there arms crossed, like listening to the speech, to the different slides, and they talk about combat stress. And he's like going through all the thing, and I can't remember what they are off the top of my head. Very operator syndrome, like
Mhm.
type presentation of things. And I was like looking around. I was like, holy shit, I have combat stress.
Yeah. Of course.
I was like, holy shit, I have combat stress. Uh, did I tell anyone?
No.
No, no. Did I like elbow the guy next to me and be like, dude, I have. No, of course I didn't. Um, I was just like, oh shit, I have combat stress. But I never did anything about it. But it was that second to last deployment where I recognized, oh, this is getting to me. You know, this stuff is getting to me.
Yeah. Don't you think a couple of things to just kind of piggyback on there? You said one op tempo is a term we throw around in the military. It's operational tempo, like how often you're going out. It applies on several levels, like going out every night multiple times, like Patrick was doing. That's a huge op tempo thing. It also applies to you come back, you have 2 months down and then you're back down range on a mob. That's also an op tempo thing. So there's different levels it can function on, but really is, from what I've read of some of the literature, that's one of the top stressors for our military is op tempo. I mean, really bad stuff comes out of it because you're cycling on, cycling off so fast. You don't have time to decompress, to just deal with. And then the other thing that goes along with that is like what I was thinking, what Patrick was saying. We in the Gulf War, we never went out more than once in a night. I mean, it was one op per night, and it was, you know, depending on when, it was more regular or less regular, but not more than one op. And what I was thinking, just because I never had to operate on that tempo uh, per night. Did you ever find that, these weird psychological things can overtake you? It's mostly emotion. It's usually not rational, but hell, the emotion is there. You got to contend with it because it's real. You feel it. Did you get the sense of, okay, yeah, like you were saying, all right, we've been out one, twice, three times, four times, five. Okay, this is our fifth. There almost becomes this kind of almost this feeling that, oh, we're due. We're due to have something go really wrong.
Mm,
Um, it's almost like the gambler's fallacy, the reverse of the gambler's fallacy, where you've been rolling and you're getting all these cold hits, and then it's like, well, it's got to get hot at some point. Well, no, that's the fallacy. Every
mm-hmm.
every roll of the dice is the same odds, but our emotional side kicks in and goes, we've been getting too lucky. We've been getting too lucky. Something's going to go bad. Weird things like that.
That's interesting. That's a great question. For me personally, I don't think so.
Hmm.
I would probably attribute that to being optimistic. Maybe my personality was one of being more, maybe it's more naive, optimistic. Mostly we'll say optimistic. I think I thought we were hot shit,
Yeah.
I think. And I knew the possibility for bodily harm was there, which is why I was getting stressed out because because I did go into every target thinking this could be the one. I don't think I ever got to the point where I got lazy. I saw other people get lazy. And I'm not saying that like
Yeah.
I'm the best. I didn't get like I I I saw egregious, you know, acts of laziness and complacency as time went on for some folks, not necessarily the dudes, not our guys necessarily. I won't get more specific than that, but I saw some, and at the same time, I was an NCO.
Hmm.
I was a team leader. It was my job to keep my guys, you know, doing the right thing. So, by by me doing the right thing, by checking on them, you know, um, I think that I just thought that we were good,
Hmm.
and I think I saw, maybe like a confirmation bias. I was like, well, we're hitting all these houses, and we seem to do it in a way that we overwhelm it relatively easily. We're catching
Hmm.
people in their sleep, you know,
Yeah.
like, and all the better for everyone. You don't even get the chance to resist. So we don't need to shoot at each other.
Hmm.
So I think I thought that we were just, I never had like a doom. I was never like, dreading or necessarily dreading, or had like a feeling of impending doom. But I could see how that could happen to someone, you know, especially there in Afghanistan. I had that one mission that really didn't go well. Um, and the feeling after that mission was, I think I talked about it. One guy after that mission, for a while, he was going out with like 12 mags, right? I think I told you that one. Like,
Yeah.
so our response to something really bad happening was, I'm not going to get caught like that again, right? I'm going to,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
that one guy, he's like, I'm carrying 12 mags. Like, dude, that's way too many. That's way
Yeah.
too many. That's way too many
Right.
mags, right? Our response after that was, I'm never going to get caught without something to eat and some like extra water, right? So like
Water.
we're carrying around extra water, like
Right.
we're all refighting that last fight. So we're expecting that to come, and then ultimately it doesn't happen. Didn't happen for us where we got caught like that. But when we were in Mosul, it was like a completely different place, a new thing. Like I wasn't carrying around, I wasn't carrying around like the shadows of missions in Afghanistan. It was just it was urban, different vibe. We're in Striker. It felt like a whole different thing. And so maybe that attributed to it as well. But I never had the specter of like a bad mission following me
Yeah.
around. Yeah. But that's a
Well,
great question.
that's a good thing. I think I'm just thinking about your sleep being rough there. And it may just be that because you were so keyed up, because you were so like you're preparing yourself fresh every mission. If you do that so many times a night, you're just going to be fried after a while because it takes a lot of psyching up to and a lot of focus and a lot of attention to not let anything go south. And
Hmm.
how many times can you do that in one night, especially when people's lives are on the line potentially?
Hmm.
So it's like one thing to talk about, well, I got to give a presentation tomorrow at my job. So, yeah, that's one thing. But, when you're talking about bullets and IEDs and suicide vests, a whole lot of gravitas can hit you.
As kind of to that, this. you would see this strange thing on these deployments. I don't even know that it's strange. Guys would do something they would call time travel. So in the case where one could, and having time to sleep was never really an issue.
Mhm.
Um, it was for me that towards the end of the deployment, it was like the quality of the sleep, right? Or being able to sleep to begin with. But there was also this other phenomenon where, let's say you did get a night out, like, guys would I say time travel, they'd get in their beds, in their sleep sack, zip it up, and they could, like, sleep for, like, incredible amounts of time. They'd get up, they'd go piss, they'd eat something, get back in their sack, and sleep for forever. They
Uh,
call it time traveling, And it's like, that's probably the body's response to the
yeah,
environment we were operating too,
yeah,
right? Just having the ability to sleep, 10 hours, get up for a little bit, and then go back to sleep for 10, like,
yeah.
that's not normal either
Mhm.
necessarily. And to just be able to, like, snap your fingers and these dudes were back out, Um, it's like space travel.
Well, it's an escape. Sleep is an escape,
Yeah.
and it's funny. I've always thought of it that way. That like some of the most stressful times in my life, not just militarily, but whatever issues I was going through, if I could just go to sleep, I didn't have to deal with it. I could just be that much less time I had to process
Mhm.
where or what I didn't want to go through. It's interesting.
And we now know, I don't know if we knew it back then, we certainly it wasn't something at the top of our heads. At least that's wasn't the reason why we were doing it, but we know that sleep has, restorative
Oh,
healing,
totally.
powers, properties. And so, on another hand, it's like, but again, um, I don't know that those guys weren't when we were back home. Those guys weren't sleeping, for that long when we were back home and they had the option to go out and do normal things. It was just when, in the heat of the deployment, you had time to rest. Maybe you had a down day, like they had the ability to just crush it and just sleep literally the entire time. It was crazy.
Mm.
So yeah. So I was stressed out by that deployment. And so we get back and, speaking of op tempo again, and speaking to the grind and speaking to boredom setting in, we go right back. What do? You come home, you go on leave, you go right back into the training cycle, you know, the same thing you do. You come back home, you go back into the training up for the next
Right.
deployment, right? Um, so, we also, you know, losing losing folks always plays into, the baggage you carry from that line of work. Um, one that bothered me was we came back from Mosul and had a buddy in our platoon. His name was Adam Bopp. I'm pretty sure it was the post deployment leave around that time or roundabouts that time. Um, we get back because I know he was on that deployment. But we get back and he a few guys went out one night, um, and they had some drinks and he died in a drunk driving accident. Okay. Um, and that was a tough one because, you know, we, Garbs earlier on, he was a private at the same time as me. We'd hang out sometimes. We were friendly. We lost for me, lost, um, we lost, Ricky, Ricky Red during that deployment. He died in that one mission, in another platoon at another objective. So, and he's a guy I just started to get to know, but Bop was someone who'd been around for a while now in the platoon and considered him a friend. He was, he was like they're all characters, but he was very smart. He's from South Bend, Indiana. Um, very smart, very funny, sarcastically funny, but like good natured though. very self-deprecating, but would just tear into some people too. Like he most people were on the level, but he found a couple people that he liked to dig into. Like they just had that relationship. And these were people who could take it, but just
Yeah.
ruthlessly tear into certain folks, you know.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys. The big that big mission in Afghanistan that went wrong. He was a gun team leader at the time, and he was awarded. They only awarded two Valor awards for that, and he was a gun. He got Bronze Star with Valor for that.
Yeah.
So he was um he was a good dude, so funny. Um and um and he'd done well. He was one of these guys who he was one of those like one step forward, two steps back kind of guys. Like he couldn't get things to go his way sometimes. It felt like everything about him would you would think like everything should be going well,
Mm-hmm.
but just he'd say something or do something, nothing negligent, but it's just like he couldn't catch a break sometimes, you would think,
Right.
and it didn't make sense. You're like, you seem tactically proficient, you're funny, you're good natured, you're a good dude. Like it seems like you struggle to get what's due to you,
Mm-hmm.
whereas sometimes I felt like for me I just kept falling in to,
Mm-hmm.
to certain spots. um and his death was a lot like that to me. It was like, damn, Bob, like you're a freaking war hero
Right.
and you die in a drunk driving accident, you know?
Yeah.
It's like if they ever make a memorial wall for any of our guys and gals
Mm-hmm.
from these wars, like they're not gonna put you on it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm not saying he would have wanted that or that's even important. But to me, I want Bob remembered for that,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which is why I feel compelled to talk about these guys, to mention them, because if not here, then where else? But but you know, and that sucked. So, and that's right after that deployment. I'm pretty sure that was that lead. Um, and we had another guy get hurt in that. Um, and and that was just tough, you know. So things for me mentally were kind of trending downward,
Mm-hmm.
to be in retrospect.
Yeah.
I don't, for Bop, I remember being really broken up when I heard the news. My best friend called me up. I'm on leave. I think it was like the first night of leave. It sucked, but
Yeah.
called me up. He said, "Dude, bad news. Bop's dead." And I was just like, I couldn't.
Yeah.
It didn't. It didn't sound real. I'm like, Bop.
Yeah.
Why the fuck would Bop be dead?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. Um, and so you had the combat stress, Bop dies, and then go into the grind of the training cycle.
Yeah.
Um, I don't have much to say there. It's kind of the same story again. It's like the same shit over and over again. You know, individual skills. You know, small unit stuff, live fires. Um, go on this trip there. Go on this trip there. Go to that school. It's like the same thing again.
Were they prepping you for Iraq again? Did you know that much?
They were prepping we I think we knew we were going back to Afghanistan. So
It's Afghanistan.
2008, yeah, 2008 was that Mosul deployment, and it was around that time where Afghanistan was, and it seems like to me in the moment, to us in the moment, it seemed like a long time. But you're
Yeah.
talking about like the last time I was in Afghanistan was '07, and then we were talking about an '09 deployment to Afghanistan again. What I was about to say was Afghanistan was getting hot again,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Right.
And we're talking about a couple of years difference. But in the way we were thinking, in the cycles that we were working in, off and
Right.
on and off and on, that was like a lifetime ago.
Right. Right.
you
Yeah.
know for everyone else living between 2007 and 2009, it was no big deal. To us, it was like three lifetimes had passed, three different deployments. um it was going to be a third deployment where you were back into it, so we knew we were going to Afghanistan. um and when we were in Mosul, it was great. It was two Ranger Strike Forces, and we were working Mosul, and that's we were very busy, and it was great. So my last one, the setup was just like my first one. We were going to be working with, uh, you know, uh, with a tier one Navy unit. I forget how we refer to them whenever we're
That'd be
talking about.
interesting. I'd really like to know that.
Yeah, it's like who. So now we were going to be paired up. Now we're going to be paired up with them, and so we went to Afghanistan, and this was a notorious troop. Um, I'll tell you later, but um, so we were working with them, and it was different. So my very first deployment, the arrangement was very like old school, more or less. It was there. You pick off a few rangers to be blocking positions while they go in and do their thing.
Hmm.
Well, by the time this last deployment, my last deployment rolls around, it's different. It's it's we take turns. So it's basically like we're taking alternating nights when we go out. So we'd alert at least I guess the Ranger Force earned enough enough props to be like, okay, well, they can go opposite of us. Or maybe they were like tired of working with Rangers, like you guys just go out on your own and we'll go, we'll do our own thing. Except for we could be flexible. There was one or two missions where they were like, we want the heavy guns from the Rangers out with us on this thing. There was only
Right.
one mission where I was supposed to do that. We got as far as briefing up. I like linked up with like one of their team leaders and we were talking about how we were going to do this thing. It was supposed to be like high up in the mountains somewhere, but thank God it didn't happen.
Hmm.
And I say thank God just because the altitude was crazy and I
Yeah.
just didn't want to be there. So, so, but by and large, we would alternate. They go out one night, we go out the next night. Um, and the op tempo there was way different.
Hmm.
So, and this was Sharana, Afghanistan. This is like 2009 sometime. And we would go out maybe once or twice a week.
Well, yeah,
So op tempo was completely different.
way different.
Yeah. Um, Maybe slightly more in it. And it was like there were times where it was more, there's times where it was less. The times where it was less, um, our counterparts from the Navy might, take the mission. They're like, you know what, we got this. It's your night, but we're going to take this because more or less they were bored. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And that's their right to do that. We get it. We're very aware of the difference between what we do and what the special mission units provide. Um, we can respect that. So, but by and large, it was slow. But for me, that was my last deployment. I made it very clear before I even left, that I was done, that I
Mm.
was going to be getting out. So I think this was like towards the summertime of '09, maybe drifting into the fall a little bit. But I was supposed to get out at more at like the beginning, like March of 2010 was when
Hmm.
my ETS date was. So when I went, I knew it was my last deployment. Um, all the jokes were about me, like, "Oh, dude, it was his last deployment." Like every time, every time, we were talking about something, it'd be like, "Oh, it was his." They pretend like I died, and they'd say, "Oh, dude, it was his last deployment. It was his last mission."
Oh yeah. Did you get a lot of grief in that?
I
I
did. You know what? I did and I didn't. So I got all the normal stuff we were talking about with you. Um, but the cultures are a little bit different. Most rangers get out. They leave after their first during my time, right? Let me do the usual disclaimer. During my time, most dudes got out actually. Um, there's a lot of attrition actually. So first off, we eat our own and we kick out a ton of people
yeah.
constantly.
Yeah.
So you've got that problem. Then we do this dangerous job, and um, a lot of people get hurt, injured, even in training. So you lose folks to that. I always talked about how during my time we were constantly undermanned,
Mm,
never had full squads, never had enough people. We just couldn't produce them fast enough.
yeah.
Um, and so and so and then for the folks who survived, the folks who didn't get a DUI and didn't hurt themselves, or didn't want to, or also didn't want to try out for the next step up, which is like a very common path,
Yep. Yep.
then it's like we get out. So, you know, for me, I knew I wanted to get out from basically my first my first time in. I was like, I knew going into the military that I probably was going to get out. But once I was in there and once I started deploying, I was like, I'm not interested in making this a lifestyle.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know how long these wars are going on, but like this
Yeah.
is not something I want to do for my entire life. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of like trying out, it's not something I ever really considered. I think that special operations selects for folks who can't help but be curious about those things or they're like, whoa, there's another level to this.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
there's bigger and better. I think if you're not the type of person who would be intrigued by that, if not like driven by that, then I don't you probably weren't selected in the first place.
Yeah.
Or at least that's a big factor. That's something that they're looking for, like ambitious types, driven types,
Oh,
right?
definitely.
Right. So for me, you know, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but so it was either like, okay, was I going to become like a ranger platoon sergeant, first sergeant?
Yeah.
Did I
Yeah.
want to be, because if you go that path, then now you're going to have to eventually become like a conventional army sergeant major, command
Right.
sergeant major, division
Right.
sergeant major, right?
Right.
That becomes your path. And conventional was being a conventional sergeant major wasn't something I was interested in because I didn't want to be in the military to begin with.
Totally.
Now you had this idea, this other path. So for Rangers, you try out for special mission units. That's what you
Right.
do. If you're gonna stay in, that's what you do.
That's what you
There
do.
was there was something of a formula of a path that didn't guarantee you didn't guarantee that you got in there, but we sent enough folks up that you could see the pattern in what they
Mhm.
were looking for. And at the time for us, it was like they like squad leaders. They like people with combat deployments. At that time, they were plentiful, so like you kind of needed combat deployments, and then they liked Ranger squad leaders. That seemed to be could that have been the Ranger Regiment like doing a psyop on us and trying to get us to do squad leader time before we bailed? Yeah,
Right.
probably because there aren't that many platoon sergeant spots, right? So
Right.
it could be that too, but that's what we would generally see. And everyone's guessing when it comes to the special mission selection, right? So so we were like, okay, you got to do squad leader time. Um, E5 squad leaders weren't that uncommon around my time. My squad leader for half of the time I was there was an E5, right? And so when he left and we were kind of looking around the platoon, I was I was kind of expecting to get picked up to be an E5 squad leader of my squad. I didn't see how else it would work unless they brought someone from somewhere else. And again, like our units were
Yeah.
under strength, so who are they going to pull from what company or battalion to come over to be our squad leader? So I kind of thought I could get squad leader early here and maybe pin early, do whatever. And then that might be interesting, right? Just fast track.
Right.
Because again, ambitious, driven. You're like, okay, well, if I'll be a squad leader early, then cool. But then they ended up there was a guy who was a ranger early in the war, got out. He was a great guy, nice guy. Got out, was a firefighter for a little bit and said, this sucks. And then he came back in. He came in as an E5
Mm.
because he had the time in service. And then they put him. I was the senior team leader, so they put him as a squad leader in the squad we were in, the one I thought I might pick up.
Hmm.
And then it was my job to help him get him up to speed. Because when he was in before, he was an FO. He wasn't an infantry guy.
Court
He was
observer.
also in a time where it was just so different. The beginning of the war, towards the end, and today, it's like they're three different
Yeah.
times. They're unrelated.
Yeah.
So I had to get him up to speed, which did which I wasn't crazy about, but I also knew in the back of my head, I was like, well, I'm getting out. I get my
Yeah.
plan was to get out anyways. So, anyways, the fact that I didn't get the squad leader time before I had a chance to decide, just pretty much for me, I was like, I didn't get squad leader time. It's not even, it doesn't seem like it's really an option. So I'm not going to try out. I'm going to
Yeah.
follow my first plan.
It's interesting when, yeah, it was kind of the same kind of deal. It was either I was going to go on to a special mission unit, at least try to go, or everything else was kind of shutting down. I was just like closing off breaker switches. Like, I don't see a life being an enlisted SEAL. you know, um, but when you and I were out talking to Kevin this past summer, it was interesting that he said that, man, it's pretty much the Army SMU now is it's like almost 90% Rangers who have kind of come in, and that makes a lot of sense to me, honestly, from an operational level. Not to take anything away from anybody at that unit, but
Right.
coming from direct action, the next logical path would be there. I can't think of anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's the way it went. So, but it didn't work out, and the stars didn't align for that to happen early for me,
Yeah.
and I was comfortable moving on to the next thing. Um, okay, we're gonna stop it there, and we'll pick back up in the next one. Thank you all for listening.